Hey guys, it's Julia. Welcome back to my channel. So you guys liked the color series a lot. I got a lot of good feedback on the yellow eyeshadows video, so we are back with red. Red is very similar to yellow in that it's super hard to formulate, very hard to get correct, and just oftentimes not a good formula. But it's a little bit different in the fact that I'm allergic to it. So I've had my fair share of like allergic reactions to different red eyeshadows, mainly because of the pigment Red 40, which in high concentrations I can be allergic to, as well as some other artificial red dyes. So I have a ton of red eyeshadows to show you guys. A lot of these are really, really good options that I've come to love and that I haven't had allergic reactions to, as well as a few things I don't like the formula of or I've had reactions to. So please let me know what color you'd like to see next, because I'm thinking I like this series a lot and I'd like to make it a thing. Let's make it a thing.
Yes!
Just like in the yellow eyeshadows video, I kind of divided it up into different types of yellows. So I figured it'd be best to start off with the red inside the James Charles and Morphe palette, because I've been talking about this palette quite a lot. James hyped this shade up, called You're Kidding, as like the world's best red matte eyeshadow ever, and then kind of shot himself in the foot.
Ma'am, Jonah shot himself in the foot.
Oh my god. What did he do this time?
No, he literally shot himself in the foot. We're in the ER.
I actually really did like this red eyeshadow a lot, and I was very nervous about this one just because I heard that these shades were A, staining people and also giving people hives, but thankfully this red shadow did not give me any sort of reaction, which I was very nervous about. So for my first like look using the red eyeshadow, I low-key kind of packed it all over my lid, which is a stupid move by me. It blended out very easily and I didn't get any hives. So explain that, Mr. Charles. So I really, really like the shade a lot. I think he did an awesome job with the formula overall of this palette. Part of the worst of category though would actually be from one of my favorite brands and favorite like colorful eyeshadow formulas, which would be SUGARPILL. So I've gotten a lot of questions before on why my SUGARPILL Pro palette doesn't include the red shade called Love Plus. I actually did used to own that shade. It was $12 and it was a huge waste of $12 because I was allergic to that. Yay! I tried so many times to get it to work for me, but every single time I used it, my eyes would just feel super itchy afterwards. It was a really good red matte shade, but if you are allergic to the same types of ingredients I am, or if you notice yourself having allergic reactions to red shadows, I would say maybe don't get that one because A, it's expensive, and B, it's good, but I would say that the Morphe one kind of gives the same effect. It's a really beautiful, like true red, vibrant red matte shade. Love Plus was not my true love. Plus.
No! God! No! No!
Another really beautiful, like vibrant, true red matte shade would be from the LORRAINE Cosmetics Paradise palette. I referenced this one in the yellow eyeshadows video for the bright yellow shade here. There's a very nice true red matte shade up in the corner, and this I feel like is very similar to the Morphe James Charles one. Swatches very similarly. It's very creamy in texture and it blends so beautifully. It doesn't blend out to be pink or like kind of fainter. It doesn't blend out orange either. It stays red, and that's very hard to find in a like nice true red matte shade. I feel like a lot of the deeper, more burgundy based ones blend out and they look pink on the edges. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but most of the time if I'm going for a true red, I want it to stay red when it blends. So this one is a really great option, and if you either don't want the James Charles one or if you just want to try an indie brand, I think this is an awesome option. I also want to mention the BH Cosmetics Take Me Back to Brazil palette, which I also talked about in the yellow video. There is one like true red matte shade in here, and this is actually very nice. It is an extremely small pan though, and within this palette, because you do get like pretty much like 2 of every matte shade in here, but you only get 1 red matte, if you are using this one consistently, you'll probably go through it really, really quickly. And it is a $16 palette, so it's like, I don't mind it that much, but you're not getting a ton of product in here, is what I'm saying. Yeah, that wasn't clear, because you're really confusing. That being said though, this red matte in here, it packs a lot of pigment, but it's still like, again, it blends out to be red, not pink or orange. I feel like it also diffuses really easily. It's one of the more blendable, super pigmented shades, and it is a pressed pigment, so kind of similar to the James Charles one. It can't necessarily be qualified as an eyeshadow legally just because of the ingredients inside it, but it has a lot of pigment to it. It goes on really, really bright on the eyes, and it doesn't take a lot of building to get a nice amount of color payoff. So I really like the red in here. It's kind of the antidote to those traditionally kind of patchy or gross red shades. I do have another like true red matte shade that is the red. worst. In the Bad Habit Aphrodite palette, there's a like red matte shade in here. And this was around, like I got this palette around the time that I didn't really have a ton of colorful palettes in my collection or colorful eyeshadows. I was really new to doing eyeshadow itself. So
No.
I also use this one in a like challenge video of full face of products I hate. So you can see how this one actually performs, but it has a lot of pigment, I guess, or brightness when it goes on, and then the second you go to blend it, it's just like it disappears. It's gone. It's just really powdery, really messy, creates a lot of fallout as well. So if you're trying to do your eyes after doing your foundation, no. Yeah, this is just not a very good eyeshadow palette or formula or brand. And then I have another red that kind of falls into the failure category, but not because it's bad. This is the JUVIA'S Place Festival palette. I really love JUVIA'S Place palettes, and I've recommended the Festival palette quite a lot, especially during autumn, because I feel like this color scheme is just like perfect for this season. I've actually used this palette in a Get Ready With Me, using the red shade here called Izafa, literally all over my entire eyes. It was one of the first eye looks I've ever created with JUVIA'S Place palettes. So I used this palette and then a red in the Saharan 2 that I'm going to mention in a second. I used that literally all over my entire eye. It looked beautiful. It was a gorgeous look, and I felt like it blended really easily. It performed really well. So if you're not allergic to red eyeshadows, this could be a great option because it's one of the best reds I've ever used. However, the next day, my eyes were covered in like bumps and hives, and it was so gross. It was the worst allergic reaction I've ever had to a red eyeshadow on my eyes. My eyes were itchy for like a week. It kind of looked like I gotten punched or like attacked or something. It was really unfortunate. So this red eyeshadow just did not work for me. Unfortunately, I've found that I am allergic to pretty much all the red eyeshadows that JUVIA'S Place makes. So the red in the Festival palette didn't work for me, even though it was a beautiful quality one. Again, if you're not allergic to red pigments, I think you'll really like this one. I am allergic to red pigments, so I can't even use this one in like small quantities, much less all over my eyes. It just makes my eyes go like, what the fuck? And then in the Saharan 2 palette by JUVIA'S, which I also used in that same Get Ready With Me. So that entire Get Ready With Me is kind of like, there's a red in here called Zora, which is this beautiful like deep burgundy shade, and this one I can use a little bit more than the Festival palette just because that one is like a true red matte shade, whereas this one is a bit more of the burgundy side. So I'm segueing my way into the second category of reds, which is like burgundies and deep and like kind of wine toned reds. So this one has a little bit less of that red pigment and a bit more deep and like pinkish purple pigment. So this one does kind of blend out to be a bit more pink, whereas the other one stays red. However, this one I'm also kind of allergic to. I've just found that most of the JUVIA'S Place red shadows or red pigmented shadows, I can't do on my eyes. Probably gonna steer clear of using red shadows from JUVIA'S Place in the future unless they come out with like a different formulation for them. But like I said, it's not a bad formula at all. I think these are actually two of the best red shadows I've ever worked with. They're just... Alright, so that palette also brings me into the next category of reds, which is kind of like burgundies and deepened like wine, Cabernet, blood. First, I want to talk about the palette that I'm actually wearing in this eye look today. So I use the BEAUTE Classical Paradise palette in this eye look, and this is one of my favorite palettes as of lately if you've been watching like any of my videos. But this was one of my favorite palettes of like the fall winter season, and probably one of the best palettes I've tried this year. Again, I mentioned the yellows in here in my yellow eyeshadows video, but the reds, so pretty. Play right here is the bright red matte that I'm wearing in the crease, so I blended this one entirely through the crease, and the first few times I tried out this palette, I was really nervous because, again, allergic to red shades. Whenever I'm trying out a new red shadow, when I put it on my eyes, I'm just like, the anxiety I feel in the pit of my stomach is just like, oh, this could mess you up forever. Sometimes it works out, and this one really did work out. So the next day, I didn't experience any allergic reaction whatsoever, which was awesome. It still blends out as red though. It doesn't turn into like a pink shade, which I really appreciate. And then Soil down here is a really beautiful like burgundy red matte shade. This one is super rich, and it's what I'm wearing on the lower lash line as well as like to deepen up the crease. This is probably one of my favorite palettes just because of the fact that they tackled some of the hardest colors to formulate in the eyeshadow world, and they did a really good job. So I also really like the Paradise Fallen for that reason, because they took on like purple eyeshadows and they did just an awesome job with it. I think BEAUTE has a really good formula, so I'm planning on reviewing the new BEAUTE palette that's coming out, so stay tuned for that one, but this is so good. And then kind of a dupe for the Classical Paradise palette, and another one of my favorite autumn winter eyeshadow palettes is the Colourpop Good Sport. I know I've been talking about this way too often, but how can I not? Honestly, it's so pretty. There's this kind of like deepened like browny burgundy maroon reddish shade called Reckless, and it's so pretty. With more deepened kind of brownish reddish shades like this one, I'm nervous that it's kind of just going to show up as a brown eyeshadow on me and not even like pull through as a red. But the burgundy in this one really did come out when I used it with a brush on the eyes, and it popped so beautifully. It's a really nice deepened kind of wine shade. It's gorgeous in any deepening shade for any eye look, and I feel like it just has this nice grungy effect. So when I look at it, actually, this palette is pretty similar to the Subculture palette from Anastasia, which I'll mention in a second. But this blends really easily. Again, it doesn't pull towards any certain color. It just looks like a true burgundy shade. Gorgeous on the eyes. So I really like the Colourpop Good Sport palette overall, but the red shades in here, or the red shade in here, it's the good kush. So, Subculture. Honestly, the red shade in here called All Star, I do really like, and I've used it before in a video here on my channel. Because it's super pigmented, they can be a bit harder to blend, but that's not the problem I have with this one. It's that sometimes if I put it on a really, really wet base, I feel like if I layer on too many shadows, it just kind of like plays with the eyes and turns into a deepened brown shadow, and you kind of lose that nice red shade. So the only way I've really found to keep the kind of redness of this burgundy right here is to pair it with like mustard yellows and oranges. Otherwise it kind of pulls to the more ship brown side. Besides that though, I really do like the Subculture palette, and I will forever defend it with my life because this is my baby. My really problematic baby. On the note of problematic babies, some of my like hands down favorite red eyeshadows come from the JACLYN Hill Morphe palette, the original one. There's a shade in here that literally rocks my world. It's the shade right here called Jax. It's this beautiful like deepened cranberry red matte shade. Probably one of the top 5 matte reds I'm mentioning in this video. It's gorgeous. So pretty on the eyes. It blends really, really easily. Again, it doesn't turn pink when you blend it out, which is awesome. I haven't had any reactions to this one, and I feel like it has just the perfect amount of like softness to it so that it's really creamy and it blends out very well, but it also doesn't just like run away and diffuse, and it's just the perfect formula for this type of shade, if that makes sense. So I really like the red shade in here. There's also kind of like a reddish orange here called Hunts, which is like kind of a ketchup shade. This one's also really pretty, but it kind of pulls towards the orange side rather than the red. So the only really like true red shade that I'd consider in this palette would be Jax right here. But overall though, I really do like the formula of this one. I think this is still just like such a good palette. And James may have unseated JACLYN, but I still think this is really nice. Another really good burgundy shade that I enjoy is from the Anastasia Soft Glam palette. So you're gonna see Anastasia in this video a couple times, but Soft Glam has a really nice shade in here called Mulberry, which is this shade right here. So beautiful. So beautiful. Again, kind of like this shade Jax that I just mentioned. It's just the perfect formulation for this type of color. This one has a little bit more brown in it than the JACLYN Hill one, so I feel like this one pulls more towards the maroon side rather than like a kind of cranberry shade. Just one of those like red shades that can look really inconspicuous, so it definitely does look red on the eyes. It just doesn't look like bloodshot or anything. It's beautiful. It also blends really easily. I love this one either as like an outer corner shade just to kind of deepen up the crease and give a little bit of depth and a bit of warmth that like just a regular brown couldn't bring. This is one of the best shades I've ever tried from Anastasia in general, and Soft Glam is just like my life. I also want to mention a shade from my Marc Jacobs Scandalous palette. So most luxury makeup brands, with the exception of like Pat McGrath, I really do not like eyeshadows from. I feel like high-end really does the best eyeshadow formulas, or indie brands. Drugstore, I don't normally like eyeshadows from the drugstore unless it's like Colourpop. And then like super expensive like bougie brands, Laura Mercier, etc. I just don't really love their eyeshadow formulas at all, except for Marc Jacobs. They have a really nice formula. So one of the palettes I have from them is called the Scandalous palette, and there's this gorgeous like red shade in here. This actually looks very similar to the Modern Renaissance when I think about it. Similar color scheme, and they're about the same price, so this one you get like half the shades, half the amount of product for the same price, but you're getting nice packaging, and that's what matters. Red shade down here called Scandalous. It's a little bit on the pink side, so it does kind of look berry toned. Marc Jacobs shadows have one of the most like rich color payoffs, and they're very creamy to the touch as well. So I think you'll see in the swatches, but it genuinely does have the same amount of pigment on the eyes as it does when you swatch it on the arm. It blends really well. It performs the way I would expect a freaking $50 eyeshadow to perform. So I really like this one a lot. It's probably not the most like practical palette to buy, especially if you're wanting like a good red matte because there's only one in here. But I like this one a lot, and this is one of my favorite like luxurious eyeshadow palettes. I wasn't really sure where to put this red eyeshadow into category just because I didn't really have anything similar to it, so I'll just throw it in now. From Colourpop, I have the Dream Street palette with Kathleen Lights, and there is a red shade in here called Spark. It's a very bright shade, just like aggressively red, and it does pull more to the orange side. So this is what I would describe as kind of an orangey red. I do prefer like true red shades, and I don't necessarily wear orangey red shades like this one, but in the Dream Street collection she has a very similar lip color to this one called Rêve. If you pair that lip color with this eyeshadow all over the eyes, so pretty as a monochromatic look. I really enjoy this shade here. It blends easily. I feel like Colourpop is very consistent with their formula, if that makes sense. And yeah, this is a really, really good shade. So, and yeah, this is a really pretty shade. So if you're wanting a bit of like a brighter kind of orangey red matte, this is your way to go. And then going on Colourpop, that also segues me into the next category, which is kind of like muted reds, if that makes sense. They're not like truly red, like bright red matte shades, but they are red. Huh? So the Colourpop Yes Please palette, which I kind of tore a new one for in the yellow eyeshadows video, I don't super love this palette as much now that I've tried more palettes from Colourpop. I just feel like they've gotten better with their quality, and this is kind of, not only is it like a year and a half old, it's just like, the color scheme is meh. There's a red shade in here, I think it's called Bling. I'm not really sure. I never really know how to read the shade names on the back just because Colourpop is freaking confusing. This is really pretty. It's kind of more muted on the red side, so it's not like bright. I feel like when you blend it out, it can really look nice and neutral if you paired it with browns, but if you paired it with like the yellows in here and the kind of coral, it can look brighter. Feels very similar to the quality of their single shadows, which I really like as well. So while this palette in terms of like the color scheme is a little bit dated for me, I do really like the shade in here, even though I absolutely hate the yellow Buttercake. Kind of similar to that shade, there's a color in the Huda Beauty Desert Dusk palette, which I really do like a lot, and it's very similar to the red shade I just showed you guys. So Saffron in the Desert Dusk palette, beautiful red matte shade. It's one of the only reds I'm not allergic to from Huda Beauty, and it's that kind of same like versatile red matte. It's not super bright on the eye, so it doesn't look like a vibrant rainbow shade, if that makes sense, but it just works really easily with a bunch of different color schemes. So whether you're going for a more purple look, a pink toned look, or like a brown look, I feel like this one doesn't look out of place with any of those things, and it just doesn't look like you're trying too hard. Huda just consistently does awesome color schemes, so I really like how she puts together different shades into a palette, and I think she did an awesome job with this shade here. I do really have problems with the rest of Huda Beauty's red matte shades, so I've tried two of her Obsessions palettes. I had Warm Brown and the Mauve Obsessions. I had to return both of them because for some reason they just really messed up my eyelids. So the Mauve Obsessions one was a lot worse, I felt like, because there was a higher concentration of the red pigment, but both of those had like red shades in there, and when I put those ones on my eyes, the next morning I woke up and there were just tiny like little bumps all over my entire lid, and my eyes were itchy. It was just not pleasant. I had to return those palettes, unfortunately, but because the Desert Dusk palette worked for me, I was kind of confused. So something kind of tells me that the Obsessions palettes are a somewhat different formula than the Desert Dusk and the bigger palettes, which might be true. I don't know. Another kind of like muted red shade I wanted to mention is another one of my favorites. This is the Modern Renaissance palette from Anastasia. So I had to mention the shade in here called Red Ochre. It's also next to the shade Venetian Red, which I feel like is very similar to the Marc Jacobs shade I just mentioned. But Red Ochre is really unique because I feel like this one it pulls very brown on the eyes, and I've talked a lot in this video about how I don't want red shadows to show up as brown. Even though it looks red in the pan, it kind of shows up as a dusty, rusty red shade in the crease. But this one, again, I feel like it's one of those really approachable reds, so if you're kind of new to color, this could kind of ease you into that. Or if you just want something that's a bit more neutral in terms of red shadows, but still is red. This is really pretty. Kind of like I said, Golden Ochre I mentioned in the yellow video is like the yellow shadow for people who don't want to wear yellow. Red Ochre is the red shadow for those who do not want to wear red. Last kind of like muted red I wanted to mention was from the Morphe JACLYN Hill Fall collection. So this is the Bling Boss palette. So this is the kind of purple toned theme palette, and there is one like red matte shade up here called Sparks. It can be patchy if you don't use it with a wet base, so you definitely want to use this one with a stickier, like tackier base. Otherwise, it's just going to be patch city on you. A bit more of like a muted cranberry red shade. I feel like this one, if you just pack it on first and then blend it out a little bit on the edges, it just creates this gorgeous like deepened cranberry red shade, but still a bit more on the muted side. So it's, again, pretty wearable and approachable, but not like, it's not like red, it's just like red. less aggressive. Although I think Bling Boss is one of my favorite palettes from the JACLYN Hill Fall collection, and one that I've done the most like looks I've really enjoyed out of. And then the Vault collection segues me into the final category, which is shimmery reds. So I want to mention the Ring the Alarm palette, which was kind of the red toned, super warm palette in the Vault collection. There's a red shade in here called Bomb Ass, which is one of the most questionable eyeshadow names in the history of makeup, until James Charles was like, hold my beer, and named his entire palette like pinkety drinkety and stuff. Bomb Ass is really pretty. I used this one in the tutorial portion of the Vault collection review I did. I do feel like it performs really best with a finger. Just in general, red shadows can be harder to get like pigmented, and red shimmers in particular can be a little bit finicky. So this one, I felt like you really did need to use it with a finger. On a brush, it just kind of didn't really do anything for me. But there's a shade in the 39A that is very similar to that shade I just showed you called Bomb Ass. So in here there's a bright red shimmer shade called Snatched. It's part of this kind of berry toned reddish quadrant of shadows in the 39A. Really like this palette because of the fact that it sequesters the different color schemes and different color stories within like 4 very readable quadrants. Snatch is pretty much the exact same color, except I feel like this one performs a little bit better with a brush. Either way, if you have this palette, you definitely do not need the Ring the Alarm palette, but I really like this one a lot. It's one of like the brighter shimmery reds I feel like just creates this gorgeous impact on the eyes. Then finally, let's finish this video off on a slightly negative note. I'll show you guys one of the worst reds I've tried out. So around like last year, I was really excited about the Stila Magnificent Metals, like the Glitter and Glow liquid shadows. They were just coming out with some really pretty colors, and I was like, oh my god, these are gonna be so great. I got one of the shades called Nexta Notte, which is this beautiful like burgundy deep reddish glitter shade, and I thought it was going to be so perfect for cut creases and stuff. I've just learned that some of these glitter and glows work really well and some of them just do not, and both of the red shades I tried from this collection were terrible. There are like 2 glitter and glow shadows from Stila that I feel like are really good. Kitten Karma is one of them, and then the rest of them I feel like they just create this beautiful rain of glitter onto my cheeks throughout the day, so if I put it anywhere near my eyes, it's gonna fall. I wish this could just like defy the laws of physics and gravity and just not do the raining onto my face, but it does. Yeah, that concludes my favorite and least favorite red eyeshadows. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the color series. I really like this one. It's just, it makes me excited. I love talking about eyeshadow. It's my whole life.
Stop it. Get some help.
And I just love sharing with you guys the very specific colors that I really enjoy from each palette that I love and talk about a lot. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed down below, and also make sure you're following me on Instagram to see makeup looks, including red eyeshadows. Very much like this one, posted pretty much every single day. Please let me know down in the comments, by the way, if you have any recommendations for some really good red matte eyeshadows. I would love to know. And yeah, keep your eyes high free. Don't brag about how you created the world's best red eyeshadow, and I'll see you in the next one.